The bills started piling up, and at first, I just chalked it up to the costs of fighting something like Julian's illness. You know, co-pays, special treatments, all that jazz. But then I started looking closer, really looking. There were these pharmacy charges, small ones, but a lot of them for things that didn't make sense. Like why so many different kinds of pain relievers? And some of the dates. They just didn't line up with when he was supposed to be getting chemo. It was like looking at a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit. My gut started to churn. It's a feeling you get, a little tremor deep down telling you something's off. I'd always been a trusting mom, maybe too trusting. Julian, my boy, always so charming, so good at making you feel like everything was going to be okay. He'd call me, his voice all weak, telling me about the latest hurdle, and I'd just want to hug him to make it all go away. But these numbers, these little scribbles on paper, they were starting to whisper a different story. I remember sitting at the kitchen table in Willow Creek Manor, the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows, making dust motes dance in the air. I had a stack of receipts spread out, and a crumpled medical bill lay on top. It was supposed to be a simple errand, just sorting through the mail, but it turned into this slow, creeping dread. Julian had been so sick, or so he'd said. He'd lost weight, his skin had that pallor you see in people who are really struggling. I'd poured everything into making him comfortable, into making sure he had the best care. But the dates on these receipts, they were just weird. A prescription filled on a Saturday when he was supposedly in the hospital. A pharmacy visit a day before a scheduled doctor's appointment. It was like a tiny crack in a perfect facade, and I couldn't stop staring at it. It wasn't a loud alarm, more like a faint hum, a dissonance that was starting to get under my skin. This wasn't just a mistake. It felt deliberate. The late afternoon sun, the same one that had been illuminating those damning receipts at Willow Creek Manor, had long since dipped below the horizon. The house, usually filled with the quiet hum of comfort, felt heavy, thick with unspoken questions. I'd put the receipts away, but they were seared into my mind. Julian was upstairs, or so I assumed. He'd been spending a lot of time in his room lately, claiming fatigue, needing to rest. I'd bring him meals, check on him, always with that ache in my chest, that desperate need to believe he was fighting the good fight. Tonight, though, the air felt different. There was a tension I couldn't quite place, a subtle shift in the usual rhythm of our lives. I was downstairs in the kitchen, rinsing out a teapot, when I heard it. A muffled sound, coming from the direction of the living room, where Julian often retreated when he felt up to it. It was the low murmur of a phone conversation, but something about the tone snagged my attention. It wasn't the weak, wheezing voice he usually adopted when talking to me about his battle. This was different, sharper, more urgent. I tiptoed towards the living room, my heart thumping a frantic beat against my ribs. The door was slightly ajar. Paused, listening. He was on his cell, pacing, his back to the door. Yeah, I got it," he said. His voice a low growl, nothing like the frail invalid I'd been coddling. The usual channels. No, nothing out of the ordinary. Keeping things smooth. Smooth. What channels? What was he talking about? My mind raced, trying to connect his words to anything related to his supposed illness. Chemo appointments. Radiation schedules. None of it fit. Look man, the transfer went through, okay? Just make sure the is handled. Discreetly, you know. This whole setup is delicate. The words felt alien, foreign. They didn't belong in the vocabulary of a young man battling a deadly disease. He sounded like a businessman, a dealer, someone involved in something shady. I pressed my ear closer to the crack in the door, straining to hear more. The sunlight was gone, replaced by the soft glow of the porch light filtering through the windows, casting long, distorted shadows that mirrored the confusion swirling inside me. "The donations are coming in steady," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, almost a whisper. "She's been generous, really generous. Thinks it's all for the cause, bless her heart. Just keep the paperwork clean on your end. No loose ends. We can't afford any hiccups. Not with the next phase coming up." The next phase. What next phase? He was supposed to be in remission, or at least fighting for it. There was no mention of phases, no talk of future treatments in the hushed tones of doctors' offices. This was a language I didn't understand, a code that felt like a punch to the gut. He laughed then, a short, sharp bark that sent a shiver down my spine. It was a cold sound, devoid of the warmth I'd always associated with my son. Yeah, she's a real trooper. Worries about me constantly. It's almost too easy. Too easy. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He was talking about me. My worry, my love, my money. All of it was too easy. The pieces of the puzzle I'd been trying to fit together, the odd pharmacy charges, the dates that didn't make sense, they suddenly clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't about sickness. This was about something else entirely. Something calculated. Something cruel. He ended the call abruptly, a quick later, and I heard his footsteps moving away from the living room, heading back towards his room. I pulled back from the door, my body trembling. The kitchen, once a place of warmth and comfort, now felt like a crime scene. The silence that followed his footsteps was deafening, filled only by the frantic pounding of my own heart and the echo of his chilling words. The phrase replayed in my mind, each repetition a fresh stab of betrayal. The mother who had poured her heart and soul into caring for her sick son was gone, replaced by a woman who had just glimpsed the terrifying truth behind a carefully crafted lie. I needed to know more. I needed proof. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I wouldn't stop until I had it. The drive to Northwestern Memorial Hospital felt like an eternity. Each mile marker we passed was another tick of the clock, another moment I was driving my son, the man who had just lied to my face, to a place where he'd continue his charade. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. Julian sat beside me, quiet, his gaze fixed on the passing city streets. He looked pale, just like he always did when he was sick, but today that paleness felt different. It felt manufactured, like a costume he wore. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice soft, the familiar tremor of weakness in it. It was the voice he used when he wanted me to feel sorry for him, the voice that had always made my heart ache. "I'm fine, Julian," I said, keeping my tone even. My insides, though, were a tangled mess of knots. The conversation I'd overheard was a phantom limb, throbbing with a pain I couldn't quite locate. Just thinking. He didn't push. He knew better than to push when I got that look. That look that said I was miles away, even when I was sitting right next to him. We pulled into the hospital parking garage, the concrete walls echoing the hollowness I felt. The air inside the hospital was always thick with a smell of disinfectant and something else, something like fear and hope all mixed up. Today it just smelled like a lie. "Just a quick checkup, Mom," Julian said, his hand brushing mine as he got out of the car. It was a casual touch, meant to be reassuring, but it felt cold, like a stranger's. "Dear, Reed just wants to make sure everything's still in the clear." The clear. That phrase. It was so vague, so unmedical. But I'd learned not to question too much. Not when he looked so frail. Not when he coughed that dry, hacking cough he'd perfected. We walked through the bustling corridors, Julian leaning on me slightly, his arm heavy against my shoulder. People stared, some with sympathy, some with that distant, polite acknowledgement you give to strangers. They saw a devoted mother and her sick son. They didn't see the truth I was starting to uncover. Reed's office was just as I remembered it. Neat, professional, a faint scent of lavender in the air. Reed herself was a picture of calm competence, her smile warm but her eyes sharp. She greeted Julian with concern, her professional demeanor unwavering. "Julian, good to see you." "And Eleanor, always a pleasure," she said, gesturing for us to sit. "So, just a routine follow-up today. How have you been feeling since your last scan?" Julian launched into his well-rehearsed narrative, his voice weak, his gestures minimal. He spoke of lingering fatigue, of moments of nausea, of the constant battle. I watched him, my stomach churning. I saw the way he avoided Reed's direct gaze when he talked about his symptoms. I saw the slight pause before he answered a question about his pain levels. It was also practiced. Reed listened intently, nodding, making notes on her tablet. She asked about his diet, his sleep, his emotional state. Each question was a probe, and Julian deflected them with practiced ease, weaving a story that was just believable enough to keep her on his side. Then she turned to me. "And Eleanor, how has Julian been at home? Any concerns you've noticed?" This was it. By chance. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at Julian, his eyes meeting mine for a fleeting second, a flicker of something unreadable in them. Was it a plea? A warning? He's been resting a lot. I began, my voice catching. I had to be careful. I couldn't accuse him directly, not here, not in front of her. He seems tired, even after a full night's sleep. And he's been complaining about headaches more often. I was feeding her what he'd told me, what he wanted her to hear. But I added a subtle twist, a detail that felt wrong. Sometimes he seems distant, like he's not really present even when he's talking. Reed's brow furrowed slightly. She looked at Julian, a question in her eyes. He just offered a weak smile. "It's the medication, doctor," Julian murmured, his voice barely audible. "Some of it makes me feel foggy." Reed nodded, making another note. She then proceeded to explain Julian's upcoming treatment schedule, a series of appointments and scans that sounded vaguely familiar but also. I tried to focus, to memorize the details, but my mind kept replaying that phone call, Julian's sharp, urgent voice. Reed spoke. I noticed a small detail on her desk. A pen holder, a stack of patient brochures, and tucked away near the back, a crumpled medical bill. It looked similar to the ones I'd been finding in Julian's mail. A wave of nausea washed over me. It was a small thing, insignificant, but it felt like another piece of the puzzle, another clue in this twisted game. I wanted to reach out to pick it up to see if it was one of Bill's, but I couldn't. Not here. Not now. The appointment concluded with Dr. Reed scheduling Julian for a follow-up scan in a few weeks. As we walked out, Julian squeezed my arm a little too tightly. "See, Mom. Nothing to worry about," he said, his smile a little too bright. But I knew better. My intuition, that gut feeling that had been screaming since I'd overheard that call, was louder than ever. Something was very, very wrong. And this hospital visit, meant to be a confirmation of his illness, had only solidified my fear that it was all a carefully orchestrated lie. I had to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The drive back to Willow Creek Manor felt longer than the trip to the hospital. Julian was quiet, too quiet. He'd played the part of the sick son perfectly. His pale face and weak voice a performance I'd once believed in so deeply. Now, every glance he stole, every sigh he let out, felt like another layer of his act. My mind, however, was already miles ahead, replaying that overheard conversation, the chilling words about donations and keeping things smooth. The hospital visit, meant to be a confirmation, had only planted a deeper seed of doubt. Reed's calm reassurance felt like a thin veil over a dark secret. Once we were home, Julian retreated to his room, claiming he needed to rest. Let him. I needed space. A moment to breathe and think without his manufactured weakness pressing down on me. The house, usually a comforting presence, felt like a stage set, every room holding the ghost of his lies. I went straight to his study, a room he rarely used, preferring the comfort of his own space. It was usually tidy, almost sterile, but today a faint sense of disarray snagged my attention. A few papers were slightly askew on his desk, and his laptop, usually closed, was open, its screen dark. My hands trembled as I sat down in his chair. This felt like a violation, but the gnawing suspicion in my gut wouldn't let me rest. I needed answers, and Julian's computer, the portal to his digital life, felt like the most logical place to start. I nudged the power button, and the screen flickered to life, revealing a generic desktop background. No obvious folders, no immediate clues. I started with his documents, scrolling through what looked like standard files, School papers, old projects, nothing out of the ordinary. My heart sank a little. Maybe I was just overreacting, letting that phone call twist my perception. Then I noticed it. A folder tucked away in a subdirectory, named something innocuous like personal projects. It wasn't password protected, which struck me as odd, given how secretive Julian had become lately. Curiosity, a dangerous beast, urged me forward. Clicked it open. Inside there were several more folders, each with a cryptic label. Phase 2. Logistics. Accounts. My breath hitched. This wasn't the language of a sick young man. This was the language of someone planning something. I clicked on accounts. A spreadsheet opened and my stomach plummeted. It wasn't a list of medical bills or insurance claims. It was a detailed ledger of deposits and withdrawals, dated over the last 2 years. Each entry was meticulously logged, with descriptions like care package contribution, comfort fund, and most disturbingly, therapy support. The amounts were significant, far more than what I'd been paying for his supposed treatments. And the dates lined up perfectly with the periods I'd been sending him money, convinced I was helping him fight for his life. My eyes scanned further down the spreadsheet, landing on a column labeled Source. Most entries simply read Eleanor. But then a few others popped up. Sarah J. Donation. Anonymous benefactor gift. Sarah. Julian's girlfriend. And anonymous donors. Who were they and what were they donating to? My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the cursor steady. I opened another folder, Phase 2. This one contained a series of emails, and as I read them, the blood drained from my face. They were between Julian and someone he referred to only as M. They discussed the ongoing project, the patient's progress, and, chillingly, strategies for maintaining donor engagement. One email mentioned a successful transition, and the need to discreetly liquidate assets before the next stage. This wasn't just about faking an illness. This was a calculated, ongoing operation. He was using my love, my money, my very identity as a source for some elaborate scheme. The visceral drama of his supposed sickness was all a lie, a performance designed to bleed me dry. I felt a cold dread creep over me, a certainty that this was only the tip of the iceberg. The digital breadcrumbs Julian had left behind were leading me down a path I never wanted to walk, a path paved with his deceit. I closed the laptop, the click of the lid echoing the finality of a truth I could no longer ignore. The sterile scent of disinfectant from Northwestern Memorial Hospital still clung to my clothes, a constant reminder of the lie I'd been living. But the truth, the ugly, biting truth, had been staring me in the face from Julian's laptop screen just hours before. Willow Creek Manor, my home, felt like a mausoleum, each room echoing with his deceit. I couldn't stay there, not with his ghost of a sickness still lingering in the air. I needed a place where I could think, a place where the silence wouldn't scream his name. That's how I found myself at Oakwood Public Library. It wasn't fancy, just rows and rows of books, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights, and the faint smell of old paper. It was the perfect camouflage. I looked like any other woman with too much time on her hands, maybe a retiree looking for a good read. Nobody knew I was a detective in my own life, digging through the wreckage of my son's lies. I spread out the printouts from Julian's computer on a table in a secluded corner. The spreadsheets, the emails with M, the cryptic folder names, Phase 2, logistics, accounts. It was a roadmap of his deception, laid bare in cold, hard data. My hands, still a little shaky, traced the columns of figures. The amounts I'd sent, convinced I was saving his life, were astronomical. And then there were the other sources, Sarah's name popping up like a bad omen, and those anonymous donations. Who were these people? What did they think they were funding? Hours melted away. I cross-referenced dates, cross-referenced amounts. I pulled up old bank statements from Sterling Financial Services, the ones I'd been so eager to show Dr. Reed, now feeling like fool's gold. The numbers aligned with chilling precision. Julian hadn't just been asking for money. He'd been orchestrating a full-blown financial operation. He'd created a narrative, and I, his mother, was the primary investor. The emails with M were the hardest to stomach. They talked about patient progress and donor engagement, like Julian was managing a business, not faking a terminal illness. One phrase kept replaying in my head: maintaining donor engagement. It sounded so cold, so calculated. He was playing a game, and I was his most valuable player. I imagined him, charming and earnest, talking to these other people, spinning his tale of woe, all while I was here, pouring my heart and my savings into his act. I found myself looking at the spines of the books around me, titles about psychology, about fraud, about manipulation. It felt like the library was offering me silent advice, a hidden curriculum for a mother who had been tragically out of her depth. I wasn't just dealing with a sick son. I was dealing with a con artist. A con artist who happened to be my flesh and blood. A small, worn, leather-bound journal sat on the table beside my printouts. It was Julian's, one of the few personal items I'd brought from his room. I hadn't dared to open it before, but now, in this quiet sanctuary of knowledge, I felt a strange pull. Maybe there was something in there, something more personal, something that would explain the emptiness behind his eyes. I opened it to a random page. It was filled with neat, precise handwriting, but the words weren't about his supposed illness. They were lists of things he wanted, things he planned, things he needed to acquire. There were notes about investments, about property, about long-term strategy. It was a business plan disguised as a diary. The truth was a heavy, suffocating blanket, and I was drowning in it. I closed the journal, the snap of the cover echoing the finality of my realization. I had to stop him. Had to undo this. The drive back to Willow Creek Manor was a blur of suppressed rage and a cold, hard certainty. The library had been a sanctuary, a place where the quiet hum of knowledge drowned out the roaring in my ears. But now, the familiar gates of my home felt like the entrance to a gilded cage, a place where I'd been living a lie for 2 years. The printouts were tucked inside my purse, a heavy weight against my hip, each sheet a testament to Julian's betrayal. I found him in the living room, sprawled on the sofa like he owned the place, which in a twisted way he did. He looked up, a practiced flicker of concern in his eyes. "Mom, you're back. How was your outing?" His voice, that smooth, innocent tone, made my stomach churn. I walked towards him, my steps deliberate, each one a hammer blow against the fragile piece he'd manufactured. I didn't sit. I stood over him, the papers a shield, a weapon. "Julian," I began, my voice low, steady. The tremor I'd felt earlier was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. "We need to talk." He pushed himself up, feigning mild confusion. "What's wrong? You look upset." "Upset doesn't even begin to cover it, honey." I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing against the worn leather-bound journal. I pulled out the stack of papers, fanning them out on the coffee table between us. The spreadsheets, the emails, the cryptic notes. "This," I said, my gaze locked on his face, "is what's wrong." His eyes darted to the papers, and for a split second the mask slipped. A flicker of panic, quickly masked by a practiced coolness. "What is all this?" "This," I repeated, my voice gaining a dangerous edge, "is the truth. The truth about your illness. The truth about the money. The truth about and phase 2, and donor engagement." I watched him, dissecting every micro-expression, every twitch of his jaw. He was good, I'd give him that. He'd spent years honing his craft. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his voice losing its usual confidence. That's just some old files. School stuff." "School stuff." I laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Is that what you call a detailed financial ledger of every cent you've conned out of me, out of others? Is that what you call emails discussing patient progress and liquidating assets?" I picked up the journal, its familiar weight a stark contrast to the ugliness it contained. "This isn't a diary, Julian. This is a business plan." He stood up then, his face a mask of disbelief and anger. "You went through my computer. My private things. You left your computer open, Julian. And your files weren't exactly hidden. It seems you were a little too confident in your little charade. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than any shout. I saw everything. The donations. Sarah's name. The comfort fund. You've been playing me, Julian. For 2 years. You've been playing everyone. The color drained from his face. The charm, the victim act, it all evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just stood there, caught in the glare of his own deceit, the grand illusion of Willow Creek Manor crumbling around us. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart. This was it. The moment of truth. The moment everything changed. He stood there, frozen. The color drained from his face like water down a sink. That practiced charm, the whole poor sick son act, it just vanished. He was just a guy caught with his hand in the cookie jar, but this wasn't about cookies. This was about my life, my savings, my trust. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Just this stupid blank look. The silence in the living room of Willow Creek Manor was thick, heavy. It felt like I couldn't breathe. All I could hear was my own heart pounding like a drum solo, loud and frantic. This was it. The moment. Everything was about to change, and not in a good way for him. I held up the printouts, my hand shaking just a little, but my voice was steady. Julian, look at me. Tell me this is school stuff. Tell me these emails about patient progress and donor engagement are just some kind of homework assignment. I watched his eyes, trying to see past the panic. He was a good actor, I'll give him that. He'd been practicing for 2 years. He finally found his voice, a weak, reedy sound. Mom, you don't understand. That was just a way to manage things. Keep track. Manage what, Julian? Manage your lies. Manage how you bled me dry. My voice was low, dangerous. I picked up the worn leather-bound journal from the coffee table. It felt heavy, not just with paper, but with the weight of his betrayal. And this isn't a diary, Julian. This is a business plan. Long-term strategy. Acquiring assets. You were building an empire on my sickness, weren't you? He flinched at the word sickness. It was like a slap in the face. He took a step back, bumping into the expensive antique side table. You went through my computer. My private stuff, he accused, his voice rising. You left it wide open, Julian. Like you thought you were invincible. Like you thought I was too stupid to notice. Did you think I wouldn't put it together? The money I sent, the anonymous donations, Sarah's name popping up everywhere. The comfort fund. I spat the words out. You've been playing me, Julian. For 2 years. You've been playing everyone. His jaw tightened. The facade was cracking, but he was still trying to hold it together. Mom, please. You're overreacting. It's not what it looks like. Oh, it's exactly what it looks like, I said, stepping closer. The scent of disinfectant from the hospital was still on me, but now it was mixed with something else. The bitter smell of deceit. It looks like my son is a con artist. A very good one, I'll admit. But a con artist nonetheless. I held out the journal. This is all the proof I need. This and every single dollar you took from me. He looked at the journal, then back at me. His eyes wide with a fear I hadn't seen before. It wasn't the fear of being caught by me. It was the fear of the game being over. The carefully constructed world he'd built was collapsing around him, brick by brick, lie by lie. He finally looked defeated, the charisma drained, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell. The silence returned, heavier this time, filled with the unspoken wreckage of our lives. He finally looked defeated, the charisma drained, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell. The silence returned, heavier this time, filled with the unspoken wreckage of our lives. It was in that quiet, that suffocating stillness, that Julian started to crack. Not a shattering crack, but a slow, deliberate unraveling, like a cheap sweater pulled too tight. Mom! he began, his voice raspy, almost a whisper. He looked down at his hands, twisting them together. You don't understand what you're seeing. It's not what it looks like. I just stared at him, my arms crossed, my gaze unwavering. The printouts were still spread out on the coffee table, a stark testament to his lies. The worn leather-bound journal lay open beside them, a silent witness. It's just complicated, he continued, his voice gaining a shaky edge. He looked up, his eyes wide, pleading. You know how sick I've been. The treatments, the hospital visits. It's a lot. Takes a toll. On everyone. He gestured vaguely, encompassing the grand living room, the expensive furniture, me. I was just trying to manage things. To make sure everything was taken care of. For you, for us. This was it. The emotional blackmail. The guilt trip. The same old playbook, just with new evidence laid bare. My heart ached, a dull, throbbing pain, but my resolve held firm. I'd loved him unconditionally. Had built my world around his supposed needs. Now that love felt like a bitter pill. Manage what, Julian? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. Manage the money I sent you every month. Manage the accounts you emptied. Manage the donor engagement. That was really just you bleeding me dry. He flinched. Mom, please. Don't say it like that. Sounds so harsh, so cold. He took a step towards me, his hands outstretched, then dropped them. I never wanted to hurt you. Never. You're my mother. Love you. The words hung in the air, hollow and meaningless. Love. Was this love? This calculated deception? This betrayal of everything I believed in? If you loved me, Julian, I said, my voice hardening, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied to me for 2 years. You wouldn't have let me believe you were dying. A tear finally escaped, tracing a hot path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated fury. He saw the tear, and his eyes lit up with a desperate hope. See, you're crying. You're hurt. 'Cause you love me. And I love you too, Mom. So much. We can get past this. We can fix this. Just put those papers away. Forget about them. It was a mistake. A big mistake, I know. But we can move on. Together. He was practically begging now, his voice cracking. Please, Mom. Don't do this to me. Fuss. He was trying to rewind time, to erase the truth that was now staring them both in the face. He wanted me to bury the evidence, to pretend it never happened, to go back to the lie. But the sanctuary of Willow Creek Manor had been breached. The illusion was shattered. There was no going back. There is no us anymore, Julian, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Not the us you've been pretending to have. You made sure of that. I picked up the worn leather-bound journal, its weight a solid, undeniable truth in my hands. This isn't a mistake. This is a crime. And I'm not going to let you get away with it. His face crumpled, the last vestiges of his act dissolving into raw, naked fear. But it was too late. Way too late. The air in Willow Creek Manor still felt thick, heavy with the wreckage of the past few hours. Julian was a ghost in his own home, a shadow of the son I thought I knew. I watched him, numb, as he finally retreated, a defeated slump in his shoulders. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart. But beneath the shock, a new resolve was hardening within me. This wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. It was about justice. I didn't waste time. The next morning, I found myself driving towards downtown Chicago. The city skyline, usually a symbol of opportunity, felt different now, tinged with the bitter taste of betrayal. My hands, still a little shaky, gripped the steering wheel. I clutched the worn leather-bound journal and the printouts of Julian's emails, the tangible proof of his lies. They were heavy in my lap, a constant reminder of the 2 years I'd been living a carefully crafted illusion. My destination was a nondescript building on a busy street, a place I'd only ever seen in news reports. Sterling Financial Services was where I'd managed my investments, where Julian had convinced me to funnel my savings. Now, it was a symbol of his calculated greed. But I wasn't here to confront the institution. I was here to find someone else. Someone who dealt with people like Julian. I'd done my homework. In the quiet hours after the confrontation, while Julian had retreated into a shell of fear and denial, I'd been busy. I'd visited Oakwood Public Library, not for books, but for their public access computers and a quiet corner. I'd researched, I'd dug. I'd found the name of a detective who had a reputation for being tough, for not backing down. Detective Marcus Thorne. The lobby of the police precinct was sterile, impersonal. The hum of fluorescent lights and the distant murmur of voices did little to soothe my nerves. I felt out of place, a woman from Willow Creek Manor suddenly thrust into this gritty world. But I held my head high. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a woman seeking justice for a crime that had nearly destroyed me. A stern-looking woman at the front desk directed me to a small, private interview room. The walls were a dull beige, the furniture functional. I sat down, placing the journal and the printouts carefully on the table. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The visceral ache in my chest was still there, a constant throb, but it was tempered by a fierce determination. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened. Detective Thorne was exactly as I'd imagined. Sharp, observant, with eyes that seemed to see right through you. He wasn't imposing, but there was an undeniable authority about him. He offered a brief, professional nod and sat down across from me. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice calm and measured. "I received your message. You said you had something urgent to discuss." I met his gaze, my own eyes steady. "Detective Thorne, thank you for seeing me. I have evidence of a serious fraud. Committed by my own son." I pushed the papers across the table. The worn leather-bound journal, the printouts of emails, the spreadsheets I'd painstakingly compiled. "This is Julian," I said, my voice tight with emotion. "My son. He's been pretending to have cancer for 2 years. And all this time he's been stealing from me. From my life savings." Thorne picked up the journal, his brow furrowing as he flipped through the pages. He examined the printouts, his expression unreadable. The silence in the room stretched, filled only by the rustle of paper and the quiet ticking of a clock on the wall. He looked up, his gaze sharp and direct. "This is quite a story, Mrs. Vance. But the evidence looks solid." He picked up a digital voice recorder from his desk. "Tell me everything, Eleanor. Start from the beginning." And I did. I told him about the lies, the manipulation, the years of deception. I told him about the money, the trust, the utter devastation. I was laying bare the most painful chapter of my life, not for sympathy, but for justice. Detective Thorne listened, his face a mask of professional calm, but his eyes missed nothing. He'd heard a lot of stories in his years, seen people at their worst, but the sheer, cold calculation Eleanor described was something else. He picked up the worn leather-bound journal, his fingers tracing the embossed title. He didn't need to be a handwriting expert to see the deliberate effort put into the forgeries, the way the dates and figures were meticulously altered. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment screw-up. This was planned, executed with a chilling precision. "So, these printouts," he said, tapping a stack of papers with his pen. "These are the emails from Julian asking for more money, right? And the bank statements show where it all went." "Exactly," I confirmed, my voice still a little shaky. He'd send me these sob stories about experimental treatments, special diets, needing to cover hospital bills not fully paid by insurance. Always just a little bit more, always just out of reach of my own budget, but somehow I always found a way. I thought I was helping my sick son. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Thorne nodded, his gaze shifting to the spreadsheets Eleanor had compiled. They were neat, organized, a testament to her diligence even in her distress. He scanned the columns, his brow furrowing slightly. "He was good," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Really good. The way he fabricated these medical expenses, the fake invoices from obscure clinics, it's almost impressive in a sick way. He then picked up a digital voice recorder and switched it on. "Eleanor," he began, his tone now formal. "For the record, please state your full name and the name of the individual you are reporting for fraud." "Eleanor Vance," I replied, my voice firming up. "And the individual is my son, Julian Vance." Thorne spent the next hour poring over the evidence. He asked me specific questions about the timing of the requests, the amounts involved, the supposed medical conditions Julian was battling. He cross-referenced dates, checked the names of the doctors Julian claimed to be seeing against a database he accessed on his laptop. Each confirmation, each detail that aligned with his suspicions, seemed to harden his resolve. He was like a bloodhound on a scent, and the trail of deceit Julian had left was, unfortunately for my son, a very strong one. "The forged medical documents," Thorne said, holding up a few pages that looked disturbingly legitimate. "These are the most damning. They're designed to look official, but the letterhead is slightly off, the signatures are too clean, almost too perfect." He looked at me, his expression serious. "This wasn't just about asking for money, Eleanor. This was a full-blown operation. He created a whole false reality for you." The confirmation, though expected, still hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just my money he'd stolen. It was my trust, my love, my belief in him. He had built an elaborate house of cards on a foundation of lies, and I had been living inside it, oblivious. Thorne's methodical examination of the evidence, his quiet confirmation of the depth of Julian's betrayal, was exactly what I needed. It was the validation that this wasn't some misunderstanding, some minor lapse in judgment. This was a crime. And Detective Thorne was here to make sure it wouldn't go unpunished. Detective Thorne's office was a small, utilitarian space, the kind that smelled faintly of stale coffee and desperation. It was a stark contrast to the polished veneer Julian always projected. I sat there, clutching my worn leather-bound journal like a shield, listening as Thorne explained his next step. He'd tracked down Sarah Jenkins, Julian's girlfriend. Apparently, she'd been more than just a girlfriend. She'd been a silent partner in his little charade. Thorne believed she knew more than she was letting on, and he intended to find out exactly what. "She's young, Eleanor," Thorne said, his voice a low rumble. "Probably scared out of her mind. Julian's got a way of twisting things, making people believe his lies. He probably fed her a story about needing her help, about how it was all for a good cause, maybe even painted himself as the victim." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant for a moment. "I'm going to have a chat with her, see if we can get her to see the light." I nodded, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Sarah. I'd met her a few times. She seemed sweet, a little naive, completely smitten with Julian. She'd always looked at him with such adoration, like he could do no wrong. The thought of her being caught up in this mess, of Julian dragging her down with him, made my heart ache. It was another layer of his betrayal, another life he'd messed with. A few days later, Thorne called me. He sounded different, less like the clinical investigator, more like a man who'd seen something he couldn't unsee. "Eleanor," he said, his voice tight. "I spoke with Sarah. You were right. She was in on it. Not the whole thing, maybe not at first, but she knew. She helped him. She was the one who picked up some of those fake prescriptions, the ones that looked almost real." My breath hitched. Sarah. Helping Julian forge documents. It was hard to reconcile the image of the sweet girl I'd met with that kind of calculated deception. "She's a mess," Thorne continued, his tone grim. Tearful. Conflicted. She said Julian convinced her it was all a game, a way to get back at his father, who he claimed had cut him off. He told her you were wealthy and didn't need the money, that you'd barely notice it was gone. He made it sound like you owed him. A game. He called this a game. My savings, my trust, my entire life's work a game. The rage, which had been simmering beneath the surface, threatened to boil over. But Thorne's next words held me captive. She's agreed to cooperate, Eleanor. She's willing to testify. She told me about a particular set of forged medical documents Julian was particularly proud of, the ones he used for the big experimental treatment withdrawals. She described them in detail. She said he kept them in a hidden compartment in his old desk, the one he still had at his apartment. She even told us where to look. My mind flashed back to that desk, a heavy dark wood piece I'd bought him years ago. I'd always thought it was a bit old-fashioned for him, but he'd insisted. A hidden compartment. Of course, there was a hidden compartment. Julian was nothing if not theatrical. She feels terrible, Eleanor, Thorne said, his voice softening slightly. She said she was blinded by him, by his charm, by the whole sob story. She's facing charges, of course, but she's ready to do the right thing now. She wants to make amends. She gave us the location of those documents. I closed my eyes, picturing Sarah, her young face etched with fear and regret. She was a victim too, in her own way. Julian had used her, just like he'd used me. But her willingness to come forward to help bring him down was a small flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness. It meant the evidence Thorne needed to truly nail Julian was within reach. It meant Julian's carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down, not just because of me, but because even those closest to him were starting to see the rot beneath the surface. The accomplice's dilemma had resolved itself, and the consequences for Julian were about to become a lot more real. It was a grim satisfaction, but a satisfaction nonetheless. The air in the offices of Sterling Financial Services felt different. It wasn't the sterile, impersonal feel of a bank. This place had a quiet dignity, a sense of old money and even older discretion. I sat across from Mr. Davies, a man whose sharp suit and sharper gaze told me he'd seen it all. He didn't flinch when I laid out the cold, hard facts of Julian's betrayal. He'd already seen the preliminary reports Thorne had shared, the initial shockwaves of my son's elaborate scheme. "We've been working with Detective Thorne, Eleanor," Mr. Davies said, his voice calm and steady like a deep river. "He's provided us with a clear picture of the financial landscape Julian created. Impressive in its own twisted way. The way he moved funds, the shell companies, the fake invoices. He was meticulous. Meticulous. That was one word for it. Ruthless was another." I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to keep my breathing even. This was it. The part where we started to claw back what was mine. It wasn't just about the money, though God knows I needed it back. It was about reclaiming a piece of myself that Julian had stolen, a piece of my life he'd twisted into a grotesque joke. "We've initiated a freeze on all accounts associated with Julian's known aliases," Mr. Davies continued, tapping a few keys on his sleek laptop. "And we're working with the authorities to trace every single dollar. It's going to be a long road, Eleanor. Reclaiming assets like this, especially when they've been so thoroughly laundered, takes time and a lot of legal maneuvering. A long road. I'd already walked a road paved with lies and heartbreak. What was a little more travel? I looked down at my hands, noticing for the first time the slight tremor that had become a constant companion. With the experience that I had, I should have seen it coming. But love, especially a mother's love, can blind you. "I understand," I managed to say, my voice a little rough. I need it back. Not just for the money. For what it represents. Trust he broke. The years he lied. Feels like a part of my life is just gone, and this is the only way to get some of it back." Mr. Davies nodded, his expression sympathetic. "We know. And we're doing everything in our power. We've identified several properties purchased with your funds, under different names, of course. The legal team is already drawing up the paperwork to contest ownership. We're also looking into the offshore accounts Thorne's team flagged. It's a tangled web, but we're starting to untangle it." He showed me some preliminary spreadsheets, charts that made Julian's financial machinations look like a child's scribbles, yet the numbers themselves were staggering. Millions. He'd siphoned millions. It was hard to comprehend, even when staring at it in black and white. I felt a wave of nausea, a visceral reaction to the sheer scale of his greed. "There will be legal fees, of course, Mr. Davies said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more businesslike. "But we've structured our agreement to be contingent on recovery. You won't pay us unless we successfully reclaim your assets. We take a percentage naturally, but our primary goal is to get your money back to you." A bittersweet victory. That's what Thorne had called it. And he was right. There was no joy in this. Only a grim determination. A sense of duty to myself, to the woman I was before Julian shattered my world. I thought about the vintage silver locket I still wore, a reminder of a simpler time, a time before my son became a stranger. "Thank you, Mr. Davies," I said, standing up. My legs felt a little steadier now. "Whatever it takes. I want it all back. Every last cent." He rose too, extending a hand. "We'll keep you updated every step of the way, Eleanor. This is our priority." Walking out of Sterling Financial Services, the Chicago wind felt a little less harsh. The city lights, usually a blur of overwhelming noise and movement, seemed to hold a sliver of hope. It was just the beginning, I knew. A long, hard fight. But for the first time since I discovered the truth, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. I felt the stirrings of a future I could reclaim, a future where Julian's lies wouldn't define me. The reckoning had begun. The air in the old Willow Creek Manor had a different feel now. It wasn't just the lingering scent of lemon polish and old money. It was heavy, thick with unspoken things. I'd spent weeks planning this, not with Thorne, not with Davies, but with myself. This wasn't about the law or money, or even justice in the way Thorne understood it. This was about Julian understanding what he'd done, not just to me, but to the very fabric of what he thought he was. I'd invited him over. Just a casual, "Hey son, let's catch up." He'd been hesitant, of course. He'd been laying low, probably enjoying the fruits of his deception, or maybe just waiting for the dust to settle. But he couldn't resist the lure of his old home, the place where he'd always felt in control, where he'd always gotten what he wanted. He walked in, that easy charm plastered on his face, looking like the son I'd always dreamed of. He even brought a cheap bottle of wine, a gesture so hollow it made my stomach churn. "Mom," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "it's good to see you. You look well." I just nodded, my gaze steady. "Sit down, Julian. We need to talk. Properly." We sat in the living room, the one with the big bay window overlooking the gardens. The same room where I'd read him bedtime stories, where we'd celebrated birthdays, where I'd always felt closest to him. Now it felt like a stage for a final, brutal act. I'd arranged for a few things to be brought in earlier that day. Not evidence, not weapons, but reminders. "You know," I started, my voice low and even, "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About you. About us." He leaned back, a smug little smile playing on his lips. "Mom, whatever it is, we can work it out. You know I'd never do anything to hurt you." That's when I gestured to the side table. On it I'd placed a few items. First, a framed photograph. It was from years ago, Julian as a little boy, maybe 7 or 8, beaming, his arm around my shoulders. He looked so pure, so full of life. Julian's eyes flickered towards it, a flicker of something unreadable, then back to me. "That was a good day," I said, my voice catching slightly. "You just won that science fair. Remember? With the volcano." He gave a short, dismissive laugh. "Yeah, Mom. Remember." Then I pointed to the next item. A small, unassuming box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a single, perfect white rose. It looked pristine, untouched. "This," I continued, my gaze locked on his, "is a rose from my garden. Picked it this morning. It's real. It's alive." I let that sink in. The contrast was deliberate. He'd built his whole life on a lie, a fake illness. This rose was the truth. Julian shifted in his seat, his smile faltering. He was starting to get it. The air crackled. He knew this wasn't a typical mother-son chat. "And then," I said, my voice hardening, my gaze unwavering, "there's this. I slid a small, worn leather-bound journal across the polished wood. It was mine, filled with my thoughts, my hopes, my fears. But I'd carefully added a few pages that detailed not just his deception, but the of it. Not the financial losses, not the legal battles, but the emotional devastation. I wrote about the sleepless nights, the constant ache in my chest, the feeling of being utterly alone. I wrote about how his lies had hollowed me out, leaving me a shell. I wrote down everything, Julian, I said, my voice raw. Not just the facts, but how it felt, how it feels, every single day. I wrote about the moments I almost broke, the times I questioned everything. I wrote about the profound, soul-crushing emptiness your actions have left behind. He stared at the journal, then at me, his eyes wide, a hint of panic creeping in. He was used to me being angry, being hurt, maybe even crying. But this quiet, deliberate dissection of his impact, this meticulous cataloging of his cruelty, was something new. It was designed to show him the true cost, the part he'd never considered. It wasn't about punishment. It was about making him it. The weight of what he'd done, the irreversible damage to a bond he'd so carelessly shattered. He was about to understand loss, not in the abstract way he'd faked it, but in a way that would echo through the rest of his life. Julian sat there, frozen. The journal lay open between us, its pages a testament to his cruelty. The framed picture, the perfect rose, they were like silent witnesses, their presence a heavy weight in the room. He'd come in with that smug, entitled air, expecting to charm his way through whatever I had planned. But the charm had evaporated, replaced by a dawning horror. His eyes darted from the journal to me, then back again. He was a cornered animal, his usual smooth talk failing him. "Mom, I didn't mean." He stammered, his voice cracking. It was the first time I'd heard genuine fear in his tone, not the manufactured kind he'd used to manipulate everyone. It was raw, primal. I leaned forward, my voice barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of every sleepless night, every tear I'd shed. "You didn't mean to break my heart, Julian. You didn't mean to steal my life savings. You didn't mean to lie to me, to everyone, for 2 years straight." I let the questions hang in the air, each one a tiny shard of glass. He swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the worn leather of the journal. He wouldn't look at the picture of himself, the innocent boy who used to climb into my lap. He couldn't. The contrast was too stark, too damning. The rose, still perfect and white, seemed to mock him, a symbol of the truth he'd so desperately tried to bury. It was a mistake, he finally managed, his voice a low rasp. "I got in too deep. I thought I could fix it." You thought you were smarter than everyone else," I finished for him, my voice flat. There was no anger left, only a profound, chilling emptiness. The fight had drained me, leaving behind a hollow space where my love for him used to reside. "You thought you could play God, Julian. You played with people's lives, with my life, like they were just pieces on a chessboard." He finally looked up, his eyes wide with a desperate plea. "Mom, please. What are you going to do?" "Thorn. He's been asking questions. Davies at Sterling. They're freezing accounts. I'm losing everything." I gave a small, humorless smile. "Good. You should. You built your whole world on lies, Julian. Now you get to see what happens when the foundation crumbles." I watched him, observing the panic bloom on his face. He was used to being in control, to always getting what he wanted. Now he had nothing. No money, no respect, no future he'd planned. He was just Julian, a man stripped bare, facing the wreckage he'd created. "I've taken care of the money, Julian," I said, my voice calm. "Every penny you stole. It's being returned. The legal team is working on it. The properties, the accounts, they're all being untangled. You'll have nothing left. Not a dime." His face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The reality was hitting him, hard and fast. The consequences he'd so carelessly ignored were now crashing down around him. He'd never truly understood the depth of my love, And now, he would never understand the depth of my resolve. And your reputation, I continued, my gaze unwavering. That's gone too. Reed has been notified. The hospital knows. Your little charade is over. No one will ever look at you the same way again. He slumped back in his chair, defeated. The swagger, the arrogance, the carefully crafted persona, it had all dissolved. He was just a scared young man, facing the stark, unforgiving truth of his actions. He had nothing to offer, no more lies to spin, no more tears to fake. I stood up, the movement slow and deliberate. The room felt heavy, charged with the finality of the moment. He looked up at me, his eyes hollow, searching for some flicker of the mother he'd once known, some hint of forgiveness. But there was none. Only the quiet understanding of what he had done, and the silent consequence that would follow him for the rest of his days. This is it, Julian, I said, my voice steady. This is the end of your game. You wanted to be someone you weren't. You wanted to live a life built on deception. Now you get to live with the emptiness you created. You wanted to be a victim. Well, now you are. But this time it's real. I turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the silence of Willow Creek Manor. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now echoed with the hollowness of his choices. He would sit there, I knew, for a long time. He would finally face the man he had become, a man with no money, no respect, and no one to blame but himself. The silence would be his only companion, a constant reminder of the price of his greed. It wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about him finally understanding the true cost of his lies, a cost he would carry for the rest of his life. The future he'd stolen from me was now lost to him, replaced by an empty, echoing present. The silence in Willow Creek Manor had finally settled, not the suffocating quiet of Julian's lies, but a clean, empty quiet. It had been a few weeks since that last, devastating conversation. Weeks of sorting through the wreckage, of making calls Thorne had advised, of signing papers that felt like signing away a part of myself. The house still held echoes, of course. Every creak of the floorboards, every shaft of sunlight cutting through the dust motes, whispered of what had been. But it was different now. The weight had lifted. I'd spent the first few days in a daze, moving through the motions like a ghost in my own life. Detective Thorne had been professional, almost gentle in his follow-up. He'd confirmed that Julian had been apprehended trying to flee the country, his carefully constructed escape plan foiled by the very system he'd tried to outsmart. Sterling Financial Services had been incredibly efficient, a stark contrast to Julian's slow, insidious drain. The money, or most of it, was coming back. Felt like a miracle, but a cold one. It wasn't the money I missed most. My days were now marked by a different rhythm. No more frantic checking of Julian's medical bills. No more second-guessing every word he spoke. Instead, I found myself drawn to the garden, the one Julian had always loved to pretend he was too sick to tend. I'd spent hours out there, my hands in the dirt, feeling the earth's solid, unpretentious truth beneath my fingertips. The roses, the ones I'd always cherished, were blooming. Each petal unfurling felt like a small victory, a quiet testament to resilience. I'd also started going to the Oakwood Public Library again. Not for research this time, not to uncover secrets, but just to sit, to read, to be anonymous. The hushed atmosphere was a balm. I'd pick up novels, anything to escape into another world for a while. Sometimes I'd just watch people, the ordinary ebb and flow of lives that hadn't been shattered by betrayal. It was a strange kind of peace, born from immense pain. One afternoon, sitting by the bay window in the living room, the same one where I'd read Julian bedtime stories, I found myself holding a small, vintage silver locket. It had been tucked away in a jewelry box, something I hadn't looked at in years. Inside were two tiny photos, one of my late husband, Robert, and one of Julian as a baby. His face impossibly small and innocent. Looking at them, I felt a pang, not of the sharp, agonizing grief from before, but a dull ache, a sorrow for the man Julian could have been, for the family we once were. It was a reminder of the love that had existed, a love that had been so cruelly twisted and exploited. I knew I'd never be the same Eleanor Vance who had lived before Julian's deception. The trust, once so easily given, was now a precious, guarded commodity. There were scars, deep ones, that would likely never fully fade. But they weren't just scars of pain. They were also marks of survival. I had faced the worst my own son could do, and I had not broken. I had taken back my life piece by painful piece. Detective Thorne had mentioned that Julian was serving his time, that the wheels of justice, however slow, were turning. I didn't harbor fantasies of reconciliation or forgiveness. That door was permanently closed. My focus was forward. I was Eleanor, and I was still here. I was rebuilding, not the grand, opulent life of Willow Creek Manor as it had been, but a simpler, more grounded existence. An existence built on truth, on resilience, and on the quiet strength I'd discovered within myself. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful, peaceful end to a day. Felt like a new beginning. The dawn was breaking, and I was ready to greet it. That's it. If you liked this video, share it with your friends and leave your like. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss more videos like this. Leave your comments saying what you thought of the video and what you would like to see in the next videos. Remembering that we have other videos in this style that you will like to watch, just enter our channel that I guarantee you will like. Until the next video.